Today we're going to talk about putting hooping inside of your sack puppet. A quick little disclaimer though, you do not have to put this inside of your puppet. I've made tons of sack puppets over the years and I've only put it in a handful of them. For example, this is Howie, one of my favorite characters, and he does not have hooping inside of him. You can tell the difference, okay? Whereas here, if I go like this, he's got a solid body in the upper half of him. But there are a few reasons why I would recommend putting it in. One reason is if your character is supposed to be bigger and have a little bit more mass, it can fill him out and help him keep that shape. Another reason is if you're only using one performer for most of the time. Many of you may know that these kind of live hand puppets are usually operated by two people. One person doing the head and one of the hands, and another whole person doing the other hand. When you have that situation, the other performer kind of helps fill out the puppet. But if you're performing alone, then that can kind of make him tend to fall flat. But with a sack puppet like this, with the hooping inside of it, even with only one hand up, he can still be pretty well filled out. I'm gonna show you really quick what it looks like. I created a lining sock, and in this case, I only have 2 hoops in it. That's plenty to fill out a character of this size. One thing that I just kind of like about sack puppets in general is that they play really big, but they also get compact pretty small. If I look at a puppet like Howie here, he can fill up so much space, but I can easily just kind of fold him up and put him into a small bag, just like that. But even though this guy over there has the hooping, he can still be folded up pretty well. Because the nice thing about the hooping is it doesn't collapse this way, which fills him out, but it does collapse this way. So he can pack very flat. The hoops compress, almost like a slinky inside of him. So it can still save a lot of space in a bag or in travel or for reasons like that. Now there's a whole bunch of different things you can use for hooping. And I'm sure there's more than the things I'm gonna list right here as well. But I'll show you a handful of them and I'll put links in the description. In my opinion, the best thing and my favorite thing is actual hooping. This technique of using these rings to fill out this body is the same kind of technique used in hooping skirts for really big wedding dresses and things like that. And this is what they used to use for. This is actual hooping. Unfortunately, it's really hard to get your hands at it now. I think they kind of stopped making this style of it, and they all use a spring steel boning, which I have some of that to show you as well. It's pretty nice, but this is a tiny bit lighter and a little bit thinner. Hooping is kind of nice because it's actually 2 thin pieces of metal encapsulated in plastic, and there's a little channel down the middle. What's nice about that is if you have an industrial sewing machine, you could actually stitch through that channel if you wanted, but a lot of times I just make a little casing and slide it through. Now this is the next best thing. This is spring steel boning. This is what they use in a lot of corsets, and now that that stuff is discontinued from what I understand, this is what a lot of people are using for hooping inside of dresses. It's a 1/2 inch wide spring steel, so it's really bendy. It works really great for making a hoop. Now there's a couple different ways to make a hoop with this. One way that I like to do is to punch holes in it on both sides and then use a rivet to attach it together. But they also sell double-ended clasps that make them fit into each other just like that, like a little coupler. Since this is a solid piece of metal, you would definitely have to make a casing for this and then sew it around. So this is a really good option. Another thing you can use is spiral boning. This is also used in corsets. So the spring steel boning is used a lot in the front and in the back, but the spiral boning is often used in the side, so you can still do movements like this in a tight-fitting dress or in a corset. But it also works great for puppets, okay? So this stuff can work really nice, and it's also a little bit more giving, which sometimes that might be handy and sometimes you might not want that, so keep that in mind. But what's also nice about this is it makes really good tails too. So you can kind of get multiple uses out of this material with puppets. And if you have trouble finding the spiral boning, I found something in a hardware store that's kind of like a similar hack, and that's this. This is a cheap little sink snake, and I actually haven't used this yet for that purpose, but I have used it. Again, this is something else I've also used for tails before, but I imagine it should work really well for hooping as well, since it has a lot of the similar characteristics to the spiral boning. So give that a try if you want. This next one you can get at most craft stores, definitely Joann Fabrics. It's called Featherlite Boning. What's nice about it if you get it at Joann is it actually comes with a casing on it, a fabric casing, okay? But you can also strip that off and just have the plastic, I guess they call it a plastic wire almost the way it works. You could just use that plastic alone as well. You can also buy it without the casing. They don't have it without the casing at Joann, but you can get it on Amazon. I've got a link for that too. Another one is the Rigilene Boning. This is another one that you can get at Joann Fabrics. The kind I use is about a 1/2 inch wide, though it does come in other thicknesses as well. And what's nice about this is it keeps pretty good shape. And again, you can stitch right through this whole thing, no problem, as long as you have a decent machine. You could probably even hand sew through this, though it probably would be a pain, but I'm sure it's possible. I know a lot of puppeteers that use this. The last one I'm going to show you is another hardware store hack, and it's just using polyethylene tubing. This is a great option because it's cheap and easy. Also, there's a really cool way to put it together. This tubing that I'm using right now has a 1/4 outer diameter and a 3/8 inner diameter. What's great about that is if you get a smaller tubing that has a 3/8 outer diameter, you can actually take a small piece of it and use it as the connector for these two tubes. So just like that, and now I can put this inside of it, just like that, and now I have a pretty good continuous loop, and this is pretty sturdy stuff too. I would recommend putting a little piece of gaffer's tape around this before you sew it in, so you don't have to worry about it coming apart, because most glues won't work on this type of material. But once it's on there, this will be a very good option for a ring. And this is what we're gonna use for the video today too. All right, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing you're gonna wanna do is make the lining for your puppet. Now, I'm not gonna demonstrate that part of it because I know every puppet that you guys have is gonna be a little different. So I wanna make sure that you make one that fits your puppet. And it also depends on the shape and the size that you want. So I already made the lining for this guy, so I'm gonna focus mostly on putting the hooping in. So this lining essentially goes right there on the puppet. It gets attached up at the neck seam. And if you download this pattern from my website, it actually comes with a lining pattern as well. In the case for this guy, the lower ring when measured straight across is 24 inches, and the lower ring is 20 inches. That's a good size for your average puppet. So in this case, I'm gonna stick this together. This is my lower ring, and this is my upper ring. All right, now I'm just gonna use a little bit of gaffer's tape to connect those joints together really strong. Now you wanna use gaffer's tape. I definitely do not recommend using duct tape because duct tape can get kind of crummy over time once it gets dried out. But the gaffer's tape is kind of made for longevity because the fabric of this is actually made out of cloth. Yes, it's actually a fabric tape, so it'll last much longer. So just put a thin little line on like that. That'll keep it from accidentally getting stretched out. Now you might think, what are the chances of it getting stretched out? The way it can come out is being pulled, but you think most of the pressure is going to be going in. But since it is on your arm, if anything ever got snagged on it, you just want to avoid that from happening. So with a little bit of tape on it like that, it should last a very long time. Now for the case of this tutorial, I'm going to use a different method to attach each one of these hoops. I would want to definitely use the same method for both, but again, I'm going to show you two different versions. One of them involves putting your hoop together first, the other one involves putting it together after it's in your puppet. I'm going to do the upper one first. For the first method, which is I think the more professional method, is to create a casing for the tubing to go through. You could use ribbon or something, but I think the best thing to use is twill tape. Twill tape is a structural thing that's very, very strong. There's a link to this down in the description as well. If you're using the 1/4 outer diameter tubing like I am in this case, then I recommend using the 3/4 inch twill tape. I found this works best for that size. Just to be clear, this is not a fabric tube, it's just a fabric strip. We're gonna create a tube by sewing this to the fabric. Here's how we do it. All right, I'm at my machine and I just traced over my pencil lines here with Sharpie so you can see them a little better. So this represents the two rings. The upper ring is here. This is the 20-inch ring in my case, and this is the 24-inch ring. Now in this case, I have these about 2.5 inches apart. Anywhere from about 2.5 to 3 inches is a good width to have those two hoops apart. I'm also using black thread, so hopefully when I do a close-up later, you can get a better idea of how it looks. One key thing is when you stitch this down, don't just stitch it down like this, because then you'd actually be going through both layers. Make sure that you turn it over like this. It makes it a little goofy for sewing, but you don't want to sew it closed, so it is important. So I'm going to flip it over and start in the middle back, and then I'm going to work my way around. In this case, I took my twill tape and I cut it longer than it needs, because sometimes the fabric can slightly stretch and move around a little bit. So I'm going to kind of guide it through on that line, and then I'll trim the extra at the end. So that's what you're going to see now. Okay, I just trimmed the extra. I'm gonna bring you in closer so you can see exactly what I'm doing. Okay, so this is the little bit of extra that I have right here. I cut it flush with this. You can see I rolled this edge and sewed this strip down before I stitched this around. But at the end, I kind of want to do the same thing, but it's a little tough to. So I cut it flush. And then I'm gonna fold it back once, and then fold it back twice, and then continue stitching across. And now that does leave about, what is that, about 1.5 inches of space, but that's so I can get the tubing in and have enough room to connect them. Because the mistake that I've made in the past is by kind of putting these flush, and you can get the tube in, but then you can't really get your connector in and close it. And just so you can see too, I only did the lower edge so far, so you can see the stitching going all around the lower edge. So now I have to make another loop going around doing the upper edge. So I'm going to do that right now. And actually I'll do it from this angle so you can hopefully see it a little bit better. There we go. Sorry, I just realized I think that maybe the sewing machine was shaking around the camera for that. But let's move you over here. All right, so here we have it. It's kind of holding it up pretty much by itself pretty well with just the twill tape on there, because it just kind of gives it a little bit more body anyway. Now, if I was going to do the lower ring too, I would do the exact same process here, right here. But again, I'm going to show you a different technique for that could be used for either of them. So let me put that hooping through, and I'm going to bend you down here so you can see better. All right. Pushing it through. Okay, toward the end does get a little bit tough, but should be able to get it through. You can see that there. It came out there. And good thing I have this room. It's still going to be a little tough, but it is possible. Oh. You don't want to hear ripping. So I put it in like that. And then, just like that. And I'll use a little bit of tape, like I said, making a little strip down the middle. So there it is, and it's got that little seam there. Another thing I like to do is I try to work it in, so worst case scenario, if that did kind of pop out, that the tubing just can kind of, this fabric tubing that we've kind of created helps keep it together a little bit better. But that's what I usually do, is I slide it around. For now I'm just going to leave it though. But just like that, I'll bring it back up. All right, now just like that, we have the tubing for the first rung there. Again, just like a little hoop skirt or like a little bell like that. It's gonna work out nicely. All right, now this next one is super simple. In fact, you don't even need a sewing machine to do it. You're just gonna loop stitch around it. And even in doing that, there's a couple ways to do it, but again, I'm gonna show you the most simple way to do it. I'm gonna tape this up here. Having it up on a stand will make it much easier to sew, and it'll make it easier for you guys to see at home. So I'm just going to tape this on. And like I said, you have to pre-loop your ring together, just like that. Now there's two ways you could do it. You could kind of roll the bottom and stitch the fabric to the fabric, but the thing is you wouldn't be able to do that if the ring was up here. You wouldn't be able to really roll the fabric. I guess you could pinch the fabric in and stitch it together, but then you'd have to compensate for that in your pattern so you don't make it too short, so keep that in mind. But again, I'm just going to show you how to just loop stitch all the way around it. To kind of hold it in place while I'm stitching, I'm just going to tape some ends together, and I'm going to take the tape off around as I go. So let me get this as even as I can. And again, I'm going to use black thread so you guys can see it a little easier. I'll zoom in now too. So the first thing you do is knot the fabric, and like I said before, one way to do it is to wrap the fabric around the bottom and then stitch the fabric to this fabric just like this, looping around. But again, you can't do that up here though because there's no bottom edge, okay? So what I'm just going to do is just do loops around the fabric and the tube just like this. Now the closest you do your stitches together, the tighter it'll be. More importantly than having it close together is just to kind of do it evenly around so that you get a good hold. In this case, I'm doing about 1/4 of an inch between each one, and you don't want to pull too tight, but you don't want to pull too loose too. You definitely have to pull as you go so that you get even tension around the tubing, because normally when you stitch with fabric, the fabric has some give to it, but this kind of tubing is going to have a lot less give. Okay. Now if you look at these stitches, they seem uneven, but that's just because it's sliding around a little bit, and when I pull it tighter at the end, it should look a little bit more even. But if you see where the stitches are going in, it's pretty even going all the way across, and that's what you want to do. So I'm just going to keep going around, and you'll notice that as I get to the tape, I'll take the tape off and then just keep going. And then at the end, I'll knot it. So I'm going to fast forward through all that right now. And when you guys see it, it will be done. So here it is. Now attaching it is very simple. You actually just attach it to the neck seam on the inside, and I would just use a simple whip stitch. Now you could, if you wanted to, put it in that seam at the same time you're adding the head on, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. If for any reason you needed to take this out, then you'd have to take that whole puppet's head off again. So I like to just sew it in by hand afterward, and then it works out great. So I'm going to pin this in Howie. I don't want to put it permanently in him because I'd want to change out the two different techniques. I'd want them to be the same. I just did that for demonstration purposes, but I'll pin it inside Howie and show you how it looks. That's another little tip too. If you want to make it so you can take it in and out as you go, pinning it in is totally fine. You can use safety pins from the inside. No one will ever see it, and it'll hold up, and then you can take it out and actually put it in different puppets at different times if that works for you. But anyway, there it is. And now Howie's got that nice little hooping inside of him. There he is. Now he's all filled out nicely. I like Howie because he matches my hair. See that? But how do you feel, buddy? I feel full. Oh, good. You look full. All right, guys. That is it for now. Let me know what else you want to see. I'm thinking about maybe doing puppet stands. I had a couple people commenting about the stands that I use, so I might show how I make them. If not, let me know what else you want to see. I have other plans for some other little mech stuff as well, so hold tightly for that. And I got a whole bunch of stuff coming up. So make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and I'll make sure I get back to you. See you next time.